Okay, we are continuing our study through the book of Genesis here on the listener's commentary, and in this recording, we are going to be looking at Genesis chapter 22, verse 20, all the way down through chapter 24, verse 67. And so we're picking up right after the binding of Isaac, where God has reaffirmed his promise to Abraham for the last time. Now what happens in the story of Genesis is the story begins winding down the story of Abraham's life and passing on the lineage of promise from Abraham to Isaac. And so we're beginning to transition to the end of Abraham's life and Abraham's story and on into Isaac's life story. And so this wrap-up begins with an update about Abraham's extended family who's still living in the region that Abraham himself left from way back in chapter 12. So they're living up around Haran and Nahor in that region. And it picks up this way in verse 20 of chapter 22. Now, it came about after these things that Abraham was told. So somehow he received a report, behold, Milcah, who is the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, Milcah has also borne children to your brother Nahor. And then it lists off those children. Uz, his firstborn, Buz, his brother, and so on. And lists off a number of Nahor's children. And it ends in verse 23 by saying, and it was Bethuel who fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. And then it lists off a few more names that were also born to Abraham's brother by a servant girl. This little mini genealogy feels sort of random here in the book of Genesis, particularly coming out of such a dramatic and climactic story as the offering of Isaac. But as we continue reading the next couple chapters, we see, it's not random. This is actually part of the transition to the end of the Abraham story and the beginning of the Isaac story, because it introduces Rebekah, who will become Isaac's wife and carry the line of promise forward. So we get this little update about Abraham's extended family, and after that, then Genesis recounts the death and burial of Sarah, Abraham's wife. And so Genesis chapter 23 says, now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Then Abraham arose from mourning before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, some people living in the region, saying, I am a stranger and a foreign resident among you. He has lived as a nomad and a stranger. He doesn't own any land or property, so that's what he's acknowledging. Give me a burial site among you so that I may bury my dead out of sight. And so Abraham, having lived as a stranger and a foreigner and a nomad in the land of Canaan, has no burial plot for his family. Now, we need to think in terms of just sort of the cultural context. You didn't just dig a little hole in the ground and bury your dead. In their culture, particularly if you are a wealthy person like Abraham is, you would want a plot of land that had a cave or series of caves that you could carve out as a burial ground. And in the caves, you would have shelves that you would lay your dead on until all the flesh had rotted off. You'd gather up the bones, put them in a box. This was the standard burial practice in the ancient world. And so Abraham is looking not just for a burial site for Sarah, although that's the immediate catalyst for this, but what will ultimately become a burial site for himself and his whole family down the line. So what you get in the following, after he brings this up to the sons of Heth, in Genesis 23:5 and following, you get an extended recounting of how Abraham negotiates a burial plot from the sons of Heth. And so they go back and forth. It's very much a kind of a Near Eastern haggling and negotiation over the plot of land. And it becomes very clear that Abraham wants to pay full price. He doesn't want them just to grant it to him. He wants to pay full price for it. He wants to own the land. And this may, again, to us, looking from the outside in, seems kind of random. Why is this included in the story? But this is really important because it's the beginning of another piece of the promise being fulfilled. Part of the promise is not only offspring as the stars of the sky, but it's also owning this land. And currently, Abraham doesn't own any. And so he haggles and he negotiates. And then finally, towards the end of it, this is what happens. As we read this next little section, picking up in 23:17, pay attention to the repetition of the word deeded over. So Genesis 23, verse 17, so Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, which faced Mamre, all descriptions of where it was at, so the original readers might even be able to identify it. The field and the cave which was in it, the cave will be the burial place, so the whole field and the cave in it, and all the trees which were in that field that were within the confines of its border. So they had negotiated, they had enunciated the borders of this whole field and everything within it, cave, land, trees, were deeded over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth, before all who entered into the gate of his city. Notice that. That's where legal affairs were taken care of, was the gate of the city. So this is a legal action before the witnesses at the gate of the city where it's deeded over to Abraham. And after this, Abraham buried his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that were in it were deeded over to Abraham as a burial site by the sons of Heth. And so we see the beginning of the land promise now being fulfilled. Abraham finally owns a plot of land in the land of promise. And so as Genesis' account of Abraham's life is coming to a close, Moses notes that the first piece of land is legally purchased in the promised land. It's deeded over as a legal action at the gate of the city. And God's promises to Abraham and to his offspring are becoming a reality. He owns a plot of land, and he has a son to carry forward the promise of Abraham's offspring now living in the land. But if that promise is to continue through Isaac, well, Isaac needs to be married so that he can have offspring. So Genesis chapter 24 picks up at that point. It reads like this: Now Abraham was old, advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. God has been faithful to Abraham and to his promises to him. Abraham said to his servant, the oldest servant of his household, who was in charge of all that he owned. So this is like the head servant, the chief servant who oversees all Abraham's other servants and much of his household. Place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live, but you will go to my country and to my relatives, and you will take a wife for my son Isaac from there. So Abraham is arranging for his servant to go and find a wife from Abraham's extended family for his son Isaac for the purpose of passing on the family line. The servant replies to Abraham, suppose, when I go all the way there to where your family lives, suppose the woman is not willing to follow me to this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you came? Well, that's going to be a problem since the land that they're living in is the land God promised. So the person has to come to this land. So Abraham said to him, beware that you don't take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, who spoke to me and swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give this land. He will send his angel ahead of you, and you will take a wife for my son from there and bring her back here. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine, only do not take my son back there. So Abraham, recognizing, no, I have trusted in the Lord's promise. He's been faithful. My son needs to continue here. This is the land of promise. So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham, and swore to him concerning the matter. Now, this placing his hand under the thigh seems like an odd sort of action, but it's some sort of symbolic action that symbolizes I'm agreeing to this plan, and I, by virtue of this action, am staking myself to it. So it's some sort of symbolic action, although at present we don't have any real parallels to it in the ancient world. Now, what follows then is a dramatic account. In fact, the longest single-going narrative in the entire book of Genesis, a dramatic account of the servant going to find a wife for Isaac. And it is a well-told, engaging story, and we will hit some of the highlights out of this story. So here's what happens, is the servant, verse 10, took 10 camels from the camels of his master. So Abraham has a herd of camels, and the servant takes 10 of them and loaded them up with a variety of good things from his master's hand as a display of his wealth, as a bride price for the wife. And he set out and went to, here this translation says, Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. Literally, the Hebrew phrase that's translated here as Mesopotamia is Aram of the two rivers. It's not Mesopotamia as in the place clear to the east. It's north, where Abraham and his family had first settled years and years ago when his father Terah was still alive. So Abraham's extended family is still there. His brother Nahor either has a city named after him, or the city of Nahor simply refers to Haran, the city where Nahor is living. Either way, it's to the north of the land of Canaan. So the servant, with his camels and probably some other servants along with him, has made the journey way to the north. He arrives at the city, and he made, verse 11, his camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water when it was evening. So it's late afternoon. They've arrived at the city. He has the camels kneel down outside the city, and he's waiting for the women to come out and draw water. And as he waits, he prays. And here's his prayer. He says, Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring, and the daughters of the men of this city are going to come out to draw water. Now may it be that the young woman to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, drink, and I will water your camels also, may she be the one that you have chosen, whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. So the servant prays. He's asking for a sign from the Lord, and the specific sign is, would you have this girl that you have chosen be the one that offers not only to give me a drink, but water my camels as well. So just as he finishes his prayer, here's what happens. Verse 15, it came about before he had finished speaking that, behold, Rebekah. Remember, we met her in the little genealogy. That's why Moses included that at the end of chapter 22 for this moment here. So that, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with a jar on her shoulder. So now we know that this is part of the family line. The young woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had had relations with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please, let me drink a little water from your jar. And she said, drink, my lord. And then she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. Now, when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will also draw water for your camels until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the watering trough, ran back to the well, drew some more, and drew for all his camels. This was a huge task, drawing water for 10 camels. Large task, but she did it. So she worked hard, filled up the watering trough for the camels until they finished drinking. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, and she's going back, getting water, filling up the trough, the camels are drinking. Meanwhile, the man was taking a close look at her in silence to find out whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. And when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring. We should probably picture a gold ring that's meant to be a nose ring, weighing a half shekel, and 2 bracelets for her wrists, weighing about 10 shekels of gold. And he said, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me. Is there room for us to stay overnight at your father's house?" Now, these gifts that he's offering are extremely costly. Evidence from this period suggests that 10 shekels was as much or more than a year's wage for an average worker. These expensive gifts would have been the kind of thing that would have caused quite a stir around town. And so she answers and said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, Milcah's son, whom she bore to Nahor." Again she said to him, "We have plenty of both straw and feed, and room for you to stay overnight." So the man bowed low, worshiped the Lord, thanking him that he has granted him success, led him to the right family and the right person. And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and his trustworthiness towards my master." God has been faithful. "And as for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers." Then the young woman ran and told her mother's household about all these things. And Rebekah has a brother whose name is Laban. Note that. That'll be important. We will meet Laban later when Jacob comes to this same area and ends up working for Laban. Well, when Laban saw Rebekah and the rings and the bracelets, he himself ran all the way out to the spring and offers hospitality to the servant, welcomes them into their household. And so the servant entered into the household of Nahor and Rebekah and Laban. Laban had the camels unloaded, made sure they had plenty of straw and feed for the animals. He gave water to wash the servant's feet, and so welcomes him into the household and prepares a meal for him. And the servant says, "I will not eat until I speak my business." So Laban invites him to speak on. And so the servant then recounts the whole story, how he's Abraham's servant, how he's been sent here to Abraham's family to find a wife for Abraham's son Isaac, and how Abraham does not want his son to marry anyone among the Canaanites, but wants to marry from within his own family, and how he had to swear an oath to Abraham and then made the journey. He tells him the whole story right up until he had prayed and asked the Lord for guidance, and then Rebekah came out and all of that. And Laban and Bethuel, Rebekah's father, replied, "Well, this matter has come from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you good or bad. Here is Rebekah before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, just as the Lord has spoken." And so they agree to this marriage, which again, we need to make sure we read in the cultural context where this is normal. Arranged marriages were part of the way life worked in the ancient world, and so they agreed to this. Abraham's servant heard their words. He was grateful. He bowed himself before the Lord in thankfulness and in worship. And then the servant brought out articles of silver and articles of gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. That would have been the bride price according to the culture's customs, and so demonstrates that she will be well provided for and well taken care of. Here's the bride price. It will basically be insurance if anything should happen to Isaac. She has these goods as wealth, as like insurance to provide for her should anything happen to Isaac. And so he brings out these goods as a bride price. He also gave precious things to her brother and to her mother, which again would demonstrate wealth and status and thus the desirability of Isaac. And then he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and he spent the night there. And when they got up in the morning, he said, "Send me away to my master." But her brother and her mother said, "Let the young woman stay with us for a few days, maybe 10, and afterwards she may go." They want a little more time to prepare her, gather things together. He was like, "No, don't delay. The Lord's prospered my way. Send me away that I'd go to my master." They said, "We will call the young woman, Rebekah, and ask her," which is striking because that's not normal, and they didn't have to do that, but they are certainly giving Rebekah a voice. Is she ready to go now, or does she want to wait a little longer? So they call her in. She agrees to go. I will go. And so verse 59 says, they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse, a maidservant, with her. They sent them with Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah and said to her, may you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s. May your descendants possess the gate of all those who hate them. And so they send her away with a blessing. Rebekah got up with her female attendants, and she and her nurse then mounted the camels and followed Abraham's servant and the other servants with him. And so the servant took Rebekah and departed. Now we fast forward to the next scene in the episode. They've made the journey all the way back down to where they left from, and Isaac had come from a journey. He had been living down south in the Negev, and now he's come back to the area where Abraham has his tents, and Isaac went out, and this translation says to meditate in the field. Others would say just to walk. We're not clear because the verb translated meditate is only used here in the Old Testament. So he's walking, maybe thinking, contemplating, just taking a stroll. We're not sure, but either way, he's out walking through the field towards evening, and he raised his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. And Rebekah raised her eyes from the back of the camels, and she saw Isaac. She dismounted from the camel, and she said to the servant, who is that man walking in the field towards us to meet us? And the servant said, he is my master. Notice, Abraham is noted as the master of the servant, but so is Isaac, and that's because Isaac is the heir and will ultimately be over the household. So, he is my master. Then Rebekah took her veil and covered herself. And we know from the customs of the day and throughout the Old Testament, this is often when veils were used, when in a marriage setting where a betrothed person was going to marry somebody else, they would veil their face. And so she put the veil over her face, and the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done, recounted the whole story, how it went down. Isaac then brought Rebekah into his mother's tent. Recall that Sarah has already died by this point, and so the significance of his mother's tent is that she will be the matron of the household. She will be the female that will be in charge of the household. That's the significance of mentioning Sarah's tent. And he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And notice how the narrative brings all these little snapshots together here in this concluding moment. Now, as we wrap up this story, let's just offer a few theological reflections. First, just a caution. And that caution is this text is not about how to discern God's will or any such thing. The servant uses watering the camels as a test to seek if the woman is the right one. And it worked. And that's great. But that's not what this passage is teaching. So we don't apply this passage by deducing from it a formula or an approach to acquiring information from God. God can do what he wants, and he's merciful and kind, and in this case he humored the servant and used the little test that he gave as a means of guiding him on his journey. And the text simply describes what happened, doesn't prescribe what ought to happen, what has to happen. In other words, the faith lesson here isn't put out a fleece to learn God's will. That's not the point of this story, and so we don't want to turn that into the primary faith lesson, even if it illustrates how God sometimes can use various circumstances to guide people into his purposes. The faith lesson of this story is based on the theological point of the narrative. And the overarching theological point of the narrative is that the Lord is directing and overseeing the fulfillment of his promise to Abraham. That's what gets highlighted throughout the story. The servant prays, and the Lord answers. The family of Rebekah recognizes the Lord's hand in it and says this is from the Lord, so we can't speak ill of this whole thing. The Lord is directing and overseeing the fulfillment of his promise to Abraham, the promise that will ultimately culminate in Jesus, the Messiah, for the redemption of the world. And what we learn from this account then is that God is both faithful to his promise and he's able to deliver on his promises, even through ordinary human cultural customs like marriages and watering camels and things like that. God is able to use the circumstances of ordinary life to deliver on his promises. And so we can have great confidence in God, who is faithful and capable of keeping his word. All right, thanks for tuning into this session of the Listener's Commentary on the book of Genesis. The Listener's Commentary is a listener-supported, crowd-funded Bible teaching ministry that's only possible by the generosity of dozens and dozens of people just like you. Every month, 60, 70, 80 people donate to this ministry to keep this ministry going forward. So thanks a ton for your generosity, for your faithful support, and for your prayers. If you have been blessed or impacted by this ministry in any way, could I encourage you to prayerfully consider joining the team of donors and supporters? Easiest way to do that is to go to listenerscommentary.com, click the Give button. It'll redirect you to a page, my page at World Family Mission, and you can set up a one-time or click little boxes, make this monthly, and make it a recurring monthly donation. You can also go to listenerscommentary.com and you can just sign up for the Study Hub, another great way to support this ministry. All monthly donors, whether through the Study Hub sign up or through the Give button, all monthly donors get access to those bonus materials inside the Study Hub. Thanks a ton for your support.